What's up guys, it's Aaronitmar, and today we are going to be jumping in the wild world that is Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 3DS and Wii U. These games were the first Smash games that were developed in the modern era, so we learned about characters, stages, mechanics, everything through Nintendo live streams rather than through random website blog posts. So we had quite a substantial amount of information that we could glean well before the game even came out, whether it was from Nintendo streams showcasing the game or from literal demos at specific Nintendo events. But aside from that, there was a ton of scrapped content for both games that we found out from interviews or through data mining.
But first, give me 10 seconds here to sell out because I just passed 175,000 subscribers, which means I am super close to 200,000. Now, when I hit 200,000, I am going to be giving away a Nintendo Switch with Smash and the Fighter Pass. So if you have not already, please subscribe so that I can hit that goal and I can give you guys a Switch. But with that out of the way, let's now talk about this pair of games and jump into everything that we weren't supposed to see. So first, let's talk about scrapped characters. Now I'm gonna go through this bit a little fast because this is kind of common knowledge at this point, but there were a few characters that were changed up from the game's initial plan. First are of course the Ice Climbers, who were cut because the 3DS could apparently not handle the strain of having so many characters on the screen at once. The Wii U version of the game handled the character perfectly fine, even up to 8-player Smash, but it was due to Sakurai's wish that both games have an identical roster that the Ices were ultimately cut. The clones for this game, Dr. Mario, Lucina, and Dark Pit, were all planned to simply be costumes for their base characters, but they each had unique traits, so Sakurai felt that they would be better served as individual characters rather than costumes. And lastly, Alf was initially going to be a full clone who used rock Pikmin in addition to the other Pikmin, but because of development constraints, he was merely made an alternate costume for Olimar. But there were a number of characters who were considered for the game that never actually made it in. Rhythm Heaven appears to have been more than considered, but actually implemented to some capacity. There's a named fighter emblem within the data that indicates Rhythm Heaven, and many speculate that this would have been the Chorus Kids, but for some reason they never made it to the full game. Takamaru from the mysterious Murasame Castle was also considered, but Sakurai felt that outside of Japan the character would be unfamiliar to players, and so he became an assist trophy instead. Chrom was also considered, but he was passed over for Robin because Sakurai felt that there wasn't really anything unique Chrom could bring over the other Fire Emblem characters already in the game. And lastly is Heihachi, a character from the Tekken series. Sakurai wrote in his book, Thoughts About Making Video Games 2, that Heihachi was considered to be playable for this game, likely because of their work with Bandai Namco, but that his moveset would be difficult to implement in Smash, and so he was ultimately simply made a Mii Fighter skin. But now let's talk about some hopefully less known information, starting with the stages. First, a Kirby's Epic Yarn stage was initially planned to be in the game, but after Yoshi's Woolly World was announced, Sakurai wanted to make a stage based on that game, and so the Epic Yarn stage was then changed to the Great Cave Offensive. This was done to avoid any confusion between the two potential stages because Epic Yarn and Woolly World both have a very similar art style, so in order to avoid any confusion, he simply got rid of the Epic Yarn stage entirely. A Super Mario Land stage was meant to be in the game, but it was changed into the Game Boy Dreamland stage. This was less of a replacement and more of a pivot, as they both had been Game Boy games and they were both going to have that same aesthetic of a Game Boy green stage, but instead of Mario Land, they picked Kirby. Magicant was planned to have a fully 3D modeled Flying Man as a stage hazard, but there was a concern that this extra model might put some strain on the 3DS hardware, and so it was replaced with a simple sprite from Earthbound, repurposing the full model later as a DLC costume. And lastly, Mario Circuit has an unused texture for a blue toad and a cart, suggesting that toads could be drivers on the track. However, in keeping with the seeming tradition, Shy Guys are the only drivers on any of the Mario Kart tracks. Now let's talk about Smash 3DS for a minute. There's not a ton of cut content found inside of the actual game, but that isn't to say that there's nothing. Inside the game's data, there exists a very small image of an early version of the boxing ring stage, but it has a few noticeable differences. The timer in the top right and the HUD at the bottom are both very clearly brawls, but of course the font of the percentages is an early version of Smash 4's. The background is also very different, with the placeholder image from Super Punch-Out being
being on the big Jumbotron. Interestingly, this same image was later found in Smash Ultimate's files, but in double the size, making it much clearer. But this isn't the only place that this image was found, as it can actually be seen in the background of the reveal trailer for Smash 4. It's honestly so quick that I'm pretty surprised that anyone noticed this, but there it is very plainly. When you compare the two images, you can very clearly see that that is this image. There are also leftovers from Kirby's Final Smash from Brawl found on Smash 3DS. For the final game, this move is changed to the Ultra Sword, but the models and the textures for each of the utensils and items that Kirby uses all still exist within the game, they're just never used. Everything else that goes unused in Smash 3DS is honestly pretty minor. There are extra graphics or textures or occasionally an extra model, but there's nothing too crazy. And I sort of attribute this to simple file size constraints. The 3DS carts really were limited in the amount of data that they could hold, so anything that wasn't being used was most likely removed because they definitely needed that precious space. But Smash for Wii U has a ton of extra data, probably because they had a much bigger file size to work with. There are text strings and animation files in Smash for Wii U that suggest that Petey Piranha was once going to be a boss returning from Brawl. Interestingly, his file name was Boss Pacoon, which is likely where Piranha Plant gets his internal name in Smash Ultimate, either because he's the same species as Petey, or because Petey Piranha is literally his final Smash. Either way, nothing else exists for Petey within the game, suggesting that he was cut pretty early into the idea. Kirby also has a few unused voice lines for Palutena. Both Japanese and English versions of Palutena's Heavenly Light and Explosive Flame custom moves can be found in the game.
Heavenly Light, Explosive Flame!
This suggests that the default neutral special had not been decided yet, or that Kirby could absorb a character's custom moves. Regardless, it's adorable hearing Kirby say these different lines. Mewtwo also has some Japanese voice lines of him actually speaking. All of these are used for his victory poses, and they're only used in the Japanese versions of the game. In the international release, Mewtwo doesn't speak at all. This was the exact same case for Melee as well. In the Japanese versions, he spoke, and in the international versions, he kinda either just laughed or didn't talk at all. A handful of characters who did not end up in the game actually have slots for announcer calls in the game's data. Ice Climbers, Pokemon Trainer, Squirtle, Ivysaur, Wolf, Snake, and the Fighting Alloy team all have space for this, but they were never put into the game and they were probably just ported from Brawl. If you access these files, they're just empty. Lucas also had this empty data slot, but it ended up being used eventually when he became a DLC fighter. Within the character select screen data, there are portraits for every single boss, despite none of them being selectable on this particular screen. Metalface even seems to be T-posing. None of these images are used based on their location in the game, though some of this art is used elsewhere, such as in Classic Mode. But one portrait stands out among all of those, and that is a special render for the 3 viruses from Dr. Mario. This render suggests that not only were these 3 meant to be a boss character, but that there was going to be a Dr. Mario stage for them to appear on. Both the boss and the stage were ultimately scrapped, but the virus render was used as the template for the virus's trophy model in the game. For some reason, Roy has an additional 9th costume slot still in the game, it's just hidden. The costume for this slot is literally just default Roy, but it has lower resolution textures and it doesn't have his headband trails or his cape. No one really knows why this is. He's the only character in the game that has some hidden away costume like this. No one really knows what it's there for. But it's most likely just a development oversight, they probably just forgot it was there. Meta Knight, Pit, and Dark Pit all have animations for gliding, despite this function actually being completely removed from Smash 4. This is probably because Meta Knight and Pit were both ported directly from Brawl before they began modifying their moveset, and because Dark Pit is built off of Pit being his clone, he has those animations too. And speaking of ports, Roy has a second jab animation which is identical to both Marth and Lucina's. This goes entirely unused because Roy only has one jab attack, rather than the 2 that Marth has. And it's probably just a leftover from the animations being copied over from Marth's because Roy is of course a semi-clone of Marth. Likewise, Gigamac has a set of animations that are probably just taken straight from Little Mac. Even though Gigamac can't use the KO punch ability ability whatsoever, he has animations for using the move both on the ground and in the air. Back in Brawl, Diddy Kong had a set of laughing animations that went entirely unused, and they were most likely linked to Diddy snickering when one of the opponents trips on his bananas. Strangely, these animations are both in Smash 4 as well, though again, they are entirely unused, so that probably suggests that Diddy Kong was simply completely copy and pasted from Brawl to Smash 4. And lastly, for unused content, I would probably be yelled at if I didn't mention the Thoria Trophy. Thanks to the ESRB leak, which gave us a ton of information about the game well before its release, an image of a Thoria Trophy was shown off, but it's mysteriously missing from the game. In fact, the ESRB leak showed a total of 686 trophies, but the final official base game has only 685. Leading Thoria to be the only missing trophy. It's widely believed that this was removed because her clothing is fairly suggestive and it may have come into conflict with the game's E10 rating. But regardless, we have photographic evidence that this existed, but I guess the ESRB just hates fun. But we're not entirely done, because this Smash was unique at the time in that we had a ton of early footage to go off of, as well as pre-release demos and things like that. So we actually got decent glimpses at the game in its beta state. First, the stock icons are way to the right of the player HUD rather than right underneath the character portrait. To me, this honestly looks almost like an error because they really just seem out of place where they're at in the beta. The font used for the battle HUD is also slightly different. It's pretty close to what we got in the final game, it just looks a little less polished. But this kind of makes sense to me because at these pre-release events, the developers are probably far more concerned about the game running in a stable state rather than how some graphics looked. Those graphics can easily be fixed later, but if the game freezes on stage at a huge Nintendo livestream, that's kind of a big deal. So they made sure that was working in proper order, and the other stuff was kind of just minor. The boxing ring stage also didn't have the characters' nicknames on the background. That's something that would eventually be added to give both the stage and the fighters a little bit more personality. One of the promotional images shows Fighter Link interacting with Conductor Link on the Spirit Track stage. This is actually impossible in the final version of the game because if a player or CPU is fighting as Link or Toon Link, Conductor Link will actually not appear. Instead, it'll be Alfonso who will show up to drive the train and run into bombs and stuff. There's an image of the 3D Land stage which shows a slightly different layout as well as slightly duller colors. This is obviously just a pending form of the stage, obviously because it's in the beta, and the colors and the layout both would be tweaked for the final release. And finally, an early version of Ike's Neutral Special shows the move with red flames, which is the form that it took in Brawl. In the final game, this was adjusted to be kind of more game accurate, now being blue flames instead of red. I say kind of because while Ike never specifically uses a blue flame attack like the one he uses in Smash, in his home series, a goddess channels her energy through him, which is represented by blue flames surrounding him. In Japanese, he's also given the nickname the Hero of Blue Flames, so this could be a direct reference to that, but in the English versions, he's simply referred to as the Radiant Hero, so this reference is kind of lost on us. And that is all of the pre-release, beta, and unused content for 2 full Smash games. There was quite a bit to look at here, and I'm honestly surprised by how much was actually inside of the games unused. I always love making these videos and doing the research for them because it gives me a good insight into like game development and kind of seeing how things change from sort of the beginning and the beta to what they ended up becoming in the final. It's kind of cool to see the mindset and the progression of that development. I'd love to know what you guys thought about this video, what your favorite unused piece of content was, or something from maybe the pre-release or beta that you kind of wished were in the final game. Anything and everything you guys have to say, I'd love to read about it down in the comments below. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the like button. If you're new, be sure to subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out and have an awesome day.